Chapter 10. As the weather turned cooler, my questions about both the sledding accident and Wilbur's whereabouts remained unanswered. I saw Officer Jake peering through the windows of Wilbur's cottage one afternoon after school, and Micah and Gacy said Gacy was avoiding him because he was a pompous nincompoop. But I thought it was awfully odd. If Gacy's only real friend was missing, why would she be avoiding the best person to help her find him? Though through my superior eavesdropping skills, I had heard rumors that Gacy Cutter had finally driven Wilbur away, that he was in hiding. It was followed by a laugh and a chilling silence. Others, including my father, said Wilbur was an independent sort, not the kind of man to be checked in, but my suspicions grew. Especially when one morning before school, I saw Officer Jake talking with Gacy in the backyard close to Wilbur's tractor. They gestured with their hands, animated. The field was overgrown and recently blanketed with cold, wet dew. "I'd give my pinky toe to know what they're talking about," I said to Micah. Today he was wearing a handmade-looking yellow and orange poncho, the hood pulled up around his face. "In fact," I said, "you go on ahead." I skulked around the trees, trying to get closer. "The longer he's gone, the worse it looks," Officer Jake was saying. I'd only just settled in when Gacy loudly said, "Curiosity killed the cat, Guinevere." I skipped away. Wasn't it too bad for her that I was Guinevere St. Clair and not a cat? "Hurry up," Jimmy said, skating ahead. "Miss Law is on the warpath." This was unfortunately true after we'd arrived half an hour late last week due to Biddy's recent show and tell, a perfectly intact squirrel who had recently met its demise in the middle of the road. And since moving to Crow, I had observed that squirrels next to Jimmy were God's most reckless creatures. The squirrel we found was so perfectly alive looking, we weren't even sure it was dead until we poked it and it didn't move. Jimmy plopped the coolest show and tell ever right in Biddy's backpack. But it made us late for school. And it wasn't even worth it, since Biddy's teacher, Miss LaRue, shrieked and threw the backpack across the room, scaring all the first graders to tears. Of course, Biddy didn't get into trouble because she was a sweet, motherless child, but I sure got it later when Nana got called to the office. Still, I'd been feeling restless for days with so many questions about the past no one would answer. "I dare you, Jimmy Quintel," I said, moving past Miss Myrtle's house, "to knock and run." "Boring," he said. "You're just chicken." This, of course, was a very ridiculous thing to say since Jimmy Quintel was many things, but chicken was not one of them. Jimmy careened so close I thought his skateboard was going to hit me. "Come on, guys," Micah said, pulling me along. "Can I knock?" Biddy asked. "You want the goose to eat you?" I said. "Oh, so it's okay for the goose to eat me?" Jimmy said. "It's too easy to knock and run. She can't even chase you. I dare you to spit in her mailbox." "Jimmy," Micah said. "She won't do it. She's too scared," Jimmy said lazily, rolling ahead on his skateboard. "I am not." "Walk, walk, walk, walk," Jimmy said. I observed Miss Myrtle's mailbox, which was affixed to the house, right next to the front door. "Why isn't the mailbox on the road like everyone else's?" "Probably because witches can't be seen in daylight," Jimmy said. I had never actually seen Miss Myrtle except for a flash of red hair or one wrinkly hand sliding out the front door to take the mail out of her box. Stalwart, I marched across the grass with Biddy following me. Jimmy and Micah made it to the maple tree and covered their eyes. I could hear Jimmy cackling. I opened the mailbox and hesitated. Jimmy balked like a chicken. I closed my eyes and spit. "Get off my porch, you nasty girl! I'm going to tell your grandmother on you!" Biddy screamed while Micah and Jimmy yelled for us to run. Mortified, I jumped off the porch and ran breathless to the maple tree, looking back to make sure Miss Myrtle wasn't flying on her broom after me. It was Biddy I saw. She had not run. She stood frozen, locked in a staring contest with the goose who had waddled around to the front. It honked, and Biddy startled. The sight was so horrifying that I screamed out to her. Micah and I began running toward her. The goose, however, had a distinct advantage, with a much smaller distance to cover. It was not afraid of us either. On the contrary, it was outwardly defiant, posturing at Biddy, angry and hissing. "Biddy!" I screamed, "Move!" But she didn't move, her face white and her mouth open. I knew that terrified feeling. It was like being in Gacy's open grave with a dead dog hanging over you. The goose came up to her face, and they were about the same height, and honked. When she didn't move, it made a pecking motion toward her. "Stop it," I said. "You stupid, stupid bird," I screamed. But the goose went in hard and nipped at Betty's cheek. "Biddy, run!" My voice became a panicked cry. The bite woke Biddy from her frozen stupor, and she finally stepped back, but fell on the sidewalk. The goose toddled around her once, then went after her again, honking loudly. Miss Myrtle's front door opened, and an old wrinkled arm reached out, grasping at the air. Biddy was crying, trying to shield her face. It was Jimmy who reached her first. He flew down the road on his skateboard, ollied over the curb, and picked Biddy up like Superman, shielding her from another lunge from the goose. When I reached the goose, it nipped me hard on the shoulder. I gave it a great kick, but missed the mark and fell. Bold and defiant, it made another lunge towards me, and I screamed a bloody murder scream. Micah, with wild eyes, hesitated just 1 second. Then he grabbed the goose by its neck. The sweet, gentle Micah wrung its neck with both hands. He wrenched it hard and dropped it on the ground, his mouth open in horror. The world went silent, and we stared down at the lifeless animal, its beautiful white feathers fluttering with a slight breeze. I half knelt and grazed them with my fingers. I took Biddy from Jimmy, cried at the blood on her cheeks, and carried her all the way back to school. The searing image that stayed with me, though, was when I looked over my shoulder just to make sure the goose hadn't revived to come after us for revenge. No, it lay still and dead. It was Miss Myrtle I remember. The one and only time I ever saw her leave her house. She sat in the grass sobbing, the dead goose in her arms. Biddy was immediately sent to the nurse. I sat with her as her face was bandaged. Nana was called. Yes, the nurse said we were fine, just to run in with the local goose. Jimmy half-heartedly punched me on the shoulder on the way to class, his way of showing affection, I supposed. "Ow," I said. "Where's Micah?" Sobbing his eyes out in the bathroom. The news made me want to sob my eyes out too. "Every once in a while," Jimmy said, holding out his hand like he'd hold a twig, "Gacy just snaps. You never know when it's coming. I guess that's what happened to Micah." Jimmy lifted his eyebrows in admiration. "You gotta admit, it's about the bravest thing he's ever done." Jimmy entered the classroom, but I stood still a moment longer. "Gwen," Miss Law popped her head out of the classroom. Snap! And yet I owed Biddy's life to Micah. He wasn't a goose murderer, only protecting us. Blindly, I hung up my jacket, walked to my seat, and sank down, trying not to think about the dead bird. It had all happened so fast. Jimmy was wrong. Micah wasn't like Gacy. And sure, Gacy snapped at Wilbur, but was it like Jimmy said? Had Gacy really snapped? When had we last seen Wilbur? I mulled it over, realizing it was the day Gacy cut off her finger. She had sat in her living room rocking and bleeding. There had been blood under the blue misters, too. It had gotten on my clothes and hands that day, and poof, we never saw Wilbur again. We had assumed all the blood was from Gacy's finger, but was it? Or was it connected to Wilbur as well? I almost groaned out loud. What kind of lawyer was I? Days and days had gone by, and now all that fresh evidence was gone. A hard, cold thought came. Something had happened to Wilbur that day, and Gacy Cutter was in the middle of it. How was I going to prove it?